The cruel laughter of Matthew Blackwood echoes through the conference room of the London skyscraper. David Mitchell, 34, single dad with a cleaning trolley, stares at the Mandarin Chinese document they've thrown on the table to humiliate him. The executives chuckle, certain they've found their entertainment for the day. But when David begins reading fluently in perfect Chinese, translating every single word of the £500 million commercial agreement, silence falls like an axe. What they're about to discover about this man will change everything. The 37th floor of the Shard gleamed under London's afternoon sun. In the crystal meeting rooms, executives in £3,000 suits decided the fate of companies and international markets. It was a world made of power, arrogance, and contempt for everything they considered inferior. David Mitchell pushed his cleaning trolley along the black marble corridors, every movement studied to be as discreet as possible. At 34, he had learned the art of invisibility. The executives looked at him like furniture, useful, but not deserving attention. Better that way. He had a daughter to feed and rent to pay. His face bore the marks of 3 years of daily humiliations, brown eyes that once sparkled with ambition, now dulled by resignation. Strong hands, once accustomed to gliding over computer keyboards, now gripped rags and detergents. His well-groomed beard hid the premature wrinkles of stress, pain, and biting poverty. That afternoon, while cleaning the windows of the main conference room, he heard agitated voices from inside. Blackwood Holdings was about to sign a commercial agreement with a Chinese multinational. £500 million at stake. The kind of contracts that could change the destiny of thousands of workers. Matthew Blackwood, son of the company founder, was 38 and had the arrogance of someone who had never fought for anything in life. Perfectly gel-styled hair, £100,000 Patek Philippe watch, ice-cold smile he used to crush anyone he considered inferior. He was the embodiment of everything David despised about the business world. Beside him, 4 other executives in navy suits chuckled as he examined documents. Their conversation was a concentrate of pride and contempt for everything that didn't belong to their golden world. Matthew noticed David cleaning on the other side of the glass and made a dismissive gesture to his colleagues. It was time for the daily show, humiliating someone to feel superior. David had seen him do it dozens of times. Waiters, delivery men, cleaners, all potential targets for his gratuitous cruelty. The conference room door burst open. Matthew emerged with document in hand, followed by his smiling lackeys. Their steps echoed on the marble like drumbeats announcing an execution. They approached David with the gait of those who enjoy causing pain. Matthew held a 20-page contract written entirely in Mandarin Chinese. Complex characters dancing on paper like indecipherable hieroglyphics for most Britons. The silence became heavy. Other employees stopped along the corridor, smelling humiliation in the air. Some looked away. Others approached to witness the entertainment. It was a cruel ritual repeated too often in that tower of arrogance. Matthew smiled with the cruelty of a child about to pull wings off a fly. He had found his toy for the day, a man already down, already humiliated by life, on whom he could unload all his pride without consequences. The document trembled slightly in the air-conditioning breeze. 20 pages of Chinese characters that could represent anything. A contract, a cooking recipe, a love poem. For Matthew, it didn't matter what was written. What mattered was the humiliation he was about to inflict. David looked at the document, then at the smiling faces around him. He felt that bitter taste in his mouth he knew well, the taste of injustice, helplessness, rage that cannot explode. He was just a man with a cleaning trolley against an army of the privileged. But what none of them knew was that David Mitchell hid a secret that was about to transform that day of ordinary cruelty into something no one would ever forget. Matthew Blackwood's laughter resonated in the corridor like breaking glass. His eyes shone with that malevolent light that ignites those who take pleasure in making others suffer. David stared at him silently, the Chinese document swaying before his eyes like a battle flag. Matthew cleared his voice theatrically, ensuring all present could hear every word of his little show. His voice was affected, studied to wound, calibrated to humiliate. He had perfected that art through years of corporate bullying. With contemptuous tone, he explained to David that this document was the most important contract in their company's history. An agreement with Xing Corporation of Shanghai that would bring £500 million into their coffers. Then, with a blood-chilling smile, he launched his challenge. If David managed to translate even one page of that contract, he would give him his monthly salary. The executives around him burst into choral laughter. The idea that a cleaner could read Chinese was as hilarious to them as imagining a fish walking. They exchanged complicit glances, already savoring the humiliation about to follow. David remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the document. The Chinese characters weren't simple signs to him. They were memories, years of study, a life he had to hide. He felt the weight of mocking stares, the buzz of stifled giggles, the electric tension of anticipation. One of the executives, a fat man with a crooked tie, whispered something in Matthew's ear, making him laugh even louder. Another began betting on how long it would take David before surrendering. The group's cruelty fed on itself, growing like fire. But David didn't move. He continued staring at the document with an intensity that was beginning to make someone uncomfortable. His eyes had lit up with a different light, as if awakening from a long sleep. His hands, accustomed to gripping rags, now trembled slightly with emotion. Matthew, interpreting that tremor as fear, pressed harder. He said if David didn't feel up to it, he could always return to his toilets to clean. That there was no shame in being ignorant. After all, it was his place in the world. The words were precise stabs, studied to wound deeply. The silence that followed was different, heavier, more charged. Some employees began feeling uncomfortable with the gratuitous cruelty they were witnessing. Others, instead, moved even closer, excited by the psychological violence underway. David slowly raised his gaze from the document. For the first time in 3 years, his eyes shone with that old pride he had to bury. He looked Matthew straight in the eyes, without lowering his gaze, without submission. It was as if he were removing a mask he had worn too long. With calm voice, almost whispered, David accepted the challenge. He said he would translate not just one page, but the entire document. And when he finished, Matthew would discover something about him he didn't expect. The group exploded in another laugh, even louder than before. The idea was so absurd that some began applauding ironically. Matthew wiped a tear of hilarity from his eyes, congratulating himself for finding such entertaining amusement. But something in David's tone, in his posture, in the way he held the document, began planting a small doubt. He was just a cleaner, they reassured themselves. What could a man who pushed trolleys for living possibly know? David took the document with steady hands. He observed it for a few seconds, as if gathering strength from somewhere deep in his soul. Then, with a voice no one had ever heard him use, he began to read. The first words in Mandarin Chinese flowed from David's mouth, like water gushing from a too-long suppressed spring. The pronunciation was perfect, the tones impeccable, the intonation natural as someone who had spoken that language for years. The corridor plunged into unreal silence. Matthew stopped laughing. The mocking smile froze on his face like winter ice. The other executives looked around, confused, but David continued reading, fluid and confident. He wasn't just reading the Chinese characters. He was simultaneously translating them into perfect English, explaining every clause with breathtaking competence. On page 5 of the contract, David stopped. He looked at Matthew with an expression mixing pity and contempt. He explained there was an error in the Italian translation they had received from their consultants, an error that would cost Blackwood Holdings about £50 million in unforeseen taxes. Matthew's face turned livid from the public humiliation he was suffering. The executives around him were no longer laughing. The atmosphere had completely changed. A gray-haired executive asked him where he had learned Chinese, who he really was. David briefly explained he had studied Oriental languages at university, that he had worked in international trade before life played him a cruel trick. Matthew, desperate, said that even if he knew Chinese, he remained a failure who cleaned toilets. It was then that David raised his eyes from the document and smiled for the first time. It was the smile of someone about to reveal the last ace up his sleeve, of someone who knows the game is about to change definitively. David gently placed the document on the crystal table. The gesture was so natural that for a moment it seemed he was the owner of that room, not Matthew. His eyes no longer showed submission, but an ancient dignity that no humiliation could erase. With calm voice, he began telling his story. David Mitchell had a cum laude degree in Oriental languages from Cambridge University. He spoke 7 languages and, until 4 years ago, directed the Asian department of Robertson Import-Export. He was the author of Eastern Dragons.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
The text that had revolutionized the British approach to Asian business. 4 years earlier, he had discovered that Robertson was using his skills to illegally import goods from China. When he threatened to report everything, he was fired and blacklisted. His wife left them, taking half their savings. He remained alone with his daughter Emma and the determination not to make her suffer. He had accepted the cleaning job because Emma had to eat and go to school. He had worn the mask of invisibility, accepting daily humiliations to guarantee his daughter a future. But every evening he continued studying, keeping his skills alive for when the right moment came. The gray-haired executive brought a hand to his forehead, incredulous. He explained to the others that David's book was considered the Bible of Asian trade, that the man they had just humiliated was a legend in their sector. Matthew looked around desperately, but the faces around him showed only embarrassment and respect for David. It was then that David made his final move. He smiled and said he had a proposal to make, a proposal that would change everything. David stood slowly, his figure seeming to grow in stature as he spoke. He was no longer the bent man who pushed trolleys, but the professional who had dominated international meeting rooms. His gestures were measured, his voice confident, his gaze penetrating like someone who had regained control of the situation. He explained that during his 3 years as a cleaner in the Shard, he had heard much more than they imagined. Offices have ears, and invisible men hear everything. He knew of their strategic errors, missed opportunities, badly negotiated contracts with Asian partners. The contract with Xing Corporation they were about to sign was just the latest in a series of badly structured agreements. David had calculated that in the last 2 years, Blackwood Holdings had lost about £200 million in missed profits in the Asian market alone, due to incompetence and lack of cultural knowledge. Matthew tried to object, but his voice came out strangled, lacking the arrogant confidence of before. The other executives looked at him with a mixture of disapproval and embarrassment. Their heir prince was making a pitiful figure in front of a cleaning employee. David continued his relentless analysis. He pulled a tablet from his cleaning trolley that he used during breaks to study. With a few touches, he showed graphs and analyses on Asian markets he had prepared over recent months, working nights in his small flat. The projections were impressive. With the right strategies and partnerships, Blackwood Holdings could triple its Asian revenues in 2 years. But it needed someone who really knew those markets, who spoke the languages, who understood the cultures. Someone like him. The gray-haired executive, who evidently had more decision-making power than Matthew, approached interested. He asked David if he would be willing to forget the humiliation suffered and work with them as a consultant. The offer was tempting, £100,000 a year, plus percentages on generated profits. David smiled and shook his head. He said their offer was generous, but insufficient, not for the money, but for the principle. He couldn't work for a company that allowed its executives to systematically humiliate weaker employees. Matthew exploded. He shouted that David was just a failure putting on airs, that his company didn't need moral sermons from a janitor. But his voice died when he realized everyone was looking at him with contempt, including his own collaborators. It was then that David revealed his real plan. During those years of cleaning, he hadn't just observed and studied. He had also made contacts. The executives of Xing Corporation knew and respected him from his Robertson import-export days, and that morning he had received a very interesting call. Xing Corporation had offered him to become their exclusive representative in Britain, not as an employee, but as a partner. They wanted him to open his own consulting company, with them as first and most important client. A £10 million contract for the first 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Matthew turned pale when he understood the implications. If David accepted, he would become their main competitor in the Asian market, and with his competence, he could easily steal all their clients. David explained he had already accepted Xing's offer. The following Monday, he would resign and start his new life. But first, he wanted to do one last favor for Blackwood Holdings, correct the contract they were about to sign for free, to prevent them losing another $50 million. He did it not for them, but for the 200 honest employees of the company who risked losing their jobs due to their executives' incompetence. People like him, who had families to feed and didn't deserve to pay for others' mistakes. While correcting the contract with surgical precision, David looked Matthew in the eyes and told him something the young heir would never forget, that real power doesn't come from inherited money or titles, but from competence, respect, and the ability to get up every time you fall. 2 years had passed since that afternoon that changed everything. David's office on the 20th floor of an elegant building in Canary Wharf had nothing of the Shard's ostentation. Wide but not intimidating windows, functional but welcoming furniture, photos of Emma everywhere, on walls, on the desk, even stuck to the computer. Mitchell Asian Consulting had become the most respected Asian market consultancy in Britain. David had built a team of 15 people, all specialists in different aspects of Asian business. But above all, he had built a company culture based on mutual respect and skills valorization. Emma, now 10, often entered the office after school. The employees adored her, and she considered them part of her extended family. She already spoke decent Chinese and dreamed of studying in the East when she was older. Her smile was identical to her father's, but brighter, more confident in the future. That afternoon, while David reviewed plans for opening the Shanghai branch, his secretary informed him there was an unexpected visit. Matthew Blackwood waited in the reception area, with a very different expression from the arrogant one of 2 years before. David sighed. He no longer felt anger towards Matthew, only vague sadness for what could have been if the young heir had chosen humility instead of arrogance. He let him in, offering coffee with the courtesy he reserved for all his guests. Matthew seemed aged 10 years. Hair no longer perfectly gelled, expensive watch replaced by a more modest model, gaze that had lost that ruthless confidence. Blackwood Holdings was in deep crisis. Badly managed Asian contracts had brought them to the brink of bankruptcy. With humble voice, Matthew asked David's forgiveness for the humiliation suffered 2 years before. He admitted he had been the real ignorant one, that he had mistaken bullying for leadership and arrogance for competence. Then, with difficulty, he did what he had come for. He asked for help. David listened in silence, without interrupting. When Matthew finished speaking, they both remained silent for a few minutes. Outside the windows, London pulsed with its frenetic life. indifferent to the personal dramas consuming its offices. Finally, David smiled. Not the revenge smile Matthew expected, but the understanding one of someone who had learned that hate is too heavy a burden to carry. He explained that his company didn't save competitors, but trained people. If Matthew was willing to start from the bottom, as an unpaid intern, perhaps he could really learn what it meant to work. Matthew accepted immediately. He no longer had the pride of 2 years before, only the desperation of someone who had hit bottom and wanted to climb back up. David assigned him Emma as first teacher. His 10-year-old daughter would teach him basic Chinese while he learned humility. 6 months later, Matthew had become a model employee. He worked 14 hours a day, studied at night, never complained. Emma teased him good-naturedly about his pronunciation errors, and he laughed, happy to be teased by a child instead of feared by frightened adults. In the evening, when the offices emptied, David looked at London from his windows and thought about the journey that had brought him there. From humiliations with the cleaning trolley to his company's success, he had learned that true victory isn't crushing those who hurt you, but becoming strong enough to forgive them. Emma always entered his office before going home for their evening ritual, a hug and the usual question. "Dad, are you happy?" And David always answered yes, because he had learned that happiness doesn't come from revenge on those who humiliated you, but from building something beautiful on the ruins of your own defeat. The last day of that month, while signing contracts for Japanese expansion, David received a call from the Shard. The gray-haired executive informed him they had installed a commemorative plaque in the conference room where it all began. The plaque simply said, "Talent has no uniform. Respect has no price." Sometimes, to change the world, it's enough for one person to have the courage to show who they really are, even when everyone thinks they know who they should be. And sometimes, the best revenge is success built with your own hands, one respect at a time. If this redemption story inspired you, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of people who transformed humiliation into triumph. Tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed workplace bullying? How did you react? And don't miss the next video where you'll discover the story of another person who surprised everyone with their hidden talents.